Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm so excited to bring you another horror and thriller wrap-up, including what, in my opinion, might be the best thriller to come out in 2021. You might not be aware, but I have tried to read a lot of the new releases when it comes to the genre, and I haven't been impressed. I've been known to be really picky, and let's just say that there are a lot of DNFs on my list. And I'd love to know if you're actually interested in me doing a whole video about all the horror and thriller books I DNF this year in terms of new releases, but today I'm here to talk about one of the best thrillers I have read, along with some other horror and thriller books that I've been reading recently. But I'm really excited to talk about this one here, and let's get started. So first, let's just jump into it. The thriller I want to review and recommend is False Witness by Karin. This is a story told from the perspective of a woman who is a successful defense attorney. She has a daughter and has a fairly successful life. However, you find out that she is running from the past. She and her sister did something as younger teenagers and have been running from the consequences of that since then. At the beginning of the story, she gets hired to take on a client who has been accused of an awful rape case. And when she meets the client, she realizes that it's possibly a personal connection and he might actually know something about what happened all those years ago. I don't want to give away too much of the plot because I didn't know a lot going in, and just trust me, this one is worth your time. I'll say that from the synopsis, it sounds like a pretty average standard thriller, and I went into it with pretty average expectations, and wow, were they blown away. So to start, I'll mention that the prologue is possibly one of the best prologues I have ever read in a thriller or otherwise. I'm actually someone who normally hates prologues because my complaint is that they tend to be very ambiguous and they don't really make sense until you read the rest of the book, and then you have to go back and reread the prologue in order to understand what it was even talking about. But this one was just so gripping, and I didn't know what was happening until it was revealed, but it was so good. So trust me, just read the prologue, and if that doesn't hook you in, I don't know what will. But I found it to be so compelling. And I should mention actually that I'm not a Karin fangirl like a lot of people are. She is very beloved online, and while I do respect her as an author, I've never been entirely hooked by her previous books. I read some of her more popular ones like Pretty Girls, and I liked it, but I didn't love it as much as other people. She is known for writing really dark books, and that is definitely the case again here. Given the subject matter, all the content warnings for sexual assault and some other really difficult subject matter that comes into the story. So you have to be prepared for that, but I will say it's handled very well. I personally didn't find it triggering, although it is not a particular trigger for me. So just kind of keep that in mind, that I think it's well done, but it's definitely there, so you have to be prepared for it. What I love so much about this book is the character work. The two sisters are very complex. They really feel like real people. They are flawed and imperfect and just very relatable. And there's just some wonderful dynamics between the sisters as well as some of the other side characters. I just thought the relationships were very well done. And this book is actually fairly long in length, but I just flew through it because I found it to be just so gripping, like I keep saying. And I was so surprised because, again, the setup sounded so generic. I've read that synopsis 100 times before about a successful young woman who has a secret past that's catching up with her, but this one was just so well plotted. It felt like a cat and mouse back and forth at different times, and it just felt dangerous, and I worried for the characters. The ending was fantastic. Now I should mention that while this didn't bother me, it might bother other readers, and that's the fact that this book is set in our current day of 2021 in our present world where 2020 happened. What I mean by that is that the characters have a lot of conversations and discussions around vaccinations and masking practices, etc. I happen to share a lot of the author's opinions on these topics, but if you don't, she really doesn't shy away from it and does get pretty judgmental at times, so keep that in mind. It might turn off some readers, but I actually didn't mind it. It was just very jarring and surprising because typically authors kind of skip over those details. but she just decided to include them and really discussed it at the end of her book, why she made those decisions to include all of that very political ideas in her story. That being said, if you just want a thriller that is going to keep you turning the pages, this in my mind is the best 2021 release in terms of the genre that I have read so far, and it's going to take a really special book to knock it out of that top place because I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. If you're a fan of Karin Slaughter, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Again, it reminded me of Pretty Girls, but I thought it was even better plotted and just had a better story. So if you can't tell, I really loved it and hope that you enjoyed as much as I did. Next, I want to talk about Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent by Jennifer Ann Gordon. This is a book that I received from the publicist for review. And this story is told over a few perspectives and a few timelines. Primarily, we're following a young man whose wife and child died tragically in a car accident, and he's turned to alcoholism to cope with it. And this is a bit of a ghost story, and I don't really want to get too much into it, but it's a very intimate one. It's very slow and haunting and very character focused. If you enjoy a horror story that is very much focused around grief, which is a really common theme in the genre and one that I think is just, honestly, it can't be done enough. I do not tire of it whatsoever. Then this was one that you might really enjoy. This is admittedly a little bit more slow burning than the horror books I typically lean towards, but I did accept it for review because the author definitely piqued my interest. I'm actually very interested in her backlist book, which I will be reviewing soon, so stay tuned for that. This is just the first of 2 reviews that are coming. But if you are a fan of ghost stories, which I know a lot of you are, this is one that you might want to have on your radar. It is a new release, it just came out, and I definitely think that a lot of you will enjoy that if you love those themes and just want a quiet story that is going to hit you in the emotional feels. Next, I want to talk about a few books I read with my Patreon horror book club, and for the month of June we were going to read The Other by Thomas Tyrone, and other than one person, we all bailed and we just could not get into it. I might try it again. I'm kind of intrigued by it, but it just was not working. Everyone was just getting into a slump trying to read it. So I suggested that we actually switch and pick up a second book. And so the book that most of us read was Come Closer by Sara, Gran, which is a horror novella that was actually a reread for me. This is a first-person perspective on a possible possession story. This woman starts to notice that she is blanking out. She's doing strange things she can't explain, and then a book comes in the mail that gives the signs of being possessed, and she starts to worry that she is possibly checking too many of the boxes. This is one I loved the first time I read it, but I loved it even more the second time around and bumped it up to a full 5 stars. It might be my all-time favorite novella. I just thought it was so well done. It is highly feminist. It really talks in very nuanced ways around mental health, and I just thought it was so smart, so well plotted. You know I love a possession story, and this one is just about perfect. There really is nothing I would change about it. You could argue that I wish it was longer, but honestly I like a short, tight story, and this one is just perfection. I love the relationship between her and her husband, and the story has an amazing ending. So if you haven't read it, highly recommend. I had so much fun rereading it with my book club, and I'm happy to say that I think basically everyone else loved it too. So it was definitely a winner in the month of June. Then in the month of July, we went on to read The Fisherman by John Langan, and this was because they voted on the theme of cosmic horror. This is a story that follows 2 men that are both widows, and they go off fishing, and before they go fishing they stop at a diner where they're told this fantastical tale, and then they go on to fish and terrible things ensue. And my goodness, this was quite the read. This was technically a reread for me, but it had been several years, and it was actually a book I wanted to reread at some point in time because I liked it the first time, but I didn't think I fully appreciated it. And honestly, unfortunately, my feelings haven't really changed. So what I loved was the beginning, the relationship between these 2 widowers and just how they had this connection over their grief. This book is highly emotional, has some incredible character work. The first section just pulled me right into the story. However, the middle section of the book, and it's a really large middle section, is them at the diner where they're being told this story, and it just reads like historical fiction to me, historical fiction mixed contrast with cosmic horror, which are two subgenres of horror that I don't typically get along with very well. I'll be honest, that middle section just was a struggle for me. I just really had trouble just staying immersed in the story. I just didn't find it to be very interesting. The ending though was so well done. So it's just really hard for me to give a rating to a book like this where I love the beginning so much, I loved the ending, but the middle section was a struggle. So I would still recommend it. It's a very literary book. I definitely think that it's very smart and well plotted. Just the narrative structure did not work for me, and I can't pretend that it did because it was just not right for my brain. I then went on to read Pitch Dark by Courtney Alameda, and this is a young adult sci-fi horror book that is following two teenagers. One of them wakes up and he finds himself in a hibernation chamber. He's woken up and things are just not quite right. And then we also follow a young woman. Soon enough, their storylines get woven together as they meet. And I will say the beginning especially had some really good horror moments, some great suspense where this young man wakes up in this cryogenic state and he knows that things aren't wrong. And it's just that very creepy feeling that you're looking for when you're picking up space horror. However, I just didn't entirely love the book, and it just comes back to the fact that it was young adult, which I just talked about in a previous video. I didn't love the tropes, although it wasn't as tropey as I expected. The characters just read young and I wasn't entirely immersed. My biggest issue is that the book is all plotted around these eco-terrorists that are trying to end humanity, and their motivations just didn't make sense to me. I did appreciate, however, the own voice's perspective. The author is Latinx heritage and the female character is also, and so she does bring up some interesting diverse elements into her story. But as a story, the plot was really weak, the characters were pretty weak, and I cautiously recommend it. If you're looking for space horror and you're okay reading young adult, you might enjoy this one a little bit more than I did. I gave it 3 stars. And finally, I read The Ice Cream Man Volume 6, which is a horror graphic novel short story collection. And if you've been following my channel for a while, I've been reading through these, and all the stories are pretty hit or miss with me, and unfortunately this collection was mostly misses. My favorite of the group was one that is framed around an advent calendar following a young teenage girl who possibly finds out she's pregnant. And while I like that story, I have to admit it really wasn't horror, it was just this Christmas story. And so I can't really recommend Volume 6. I've liked some of the previous volumes, but as a collection, these volumes just seem to be really inconsistent. I'll keep going with them because they're available on Hoopla, but I don't know what to think of them at this point. So that's it. We have made it to the end of the video here. I'd love to hear down below if you're planning on checking out any of the books I talked about today. Also consider signing up for my horror Patreon book club. If you'd like to join us for the month of August, we're going to be reading Sweetheart, Sweetheart by Bernard Taylor, and there's still time to join us. I would definitely love to discuss that book with more of you. And I would also love to hear what is the best 2021 thriller that you have read, because at the moment, False Witness is definitely the book to beat, and I would like to read a few more thrillers just to see if anything can top it before the end of the year when I start putting out my best of the year videos. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy. You can help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, and if you hit that little notification button, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.